Great. Welcome back from your lunch. Hope everybody had a really nice lunch, at least a sandwich, cup of coffee, and all that kind of good stuff. I'm so pleased about this next panel session. This is a really heavyweight panel of industry luminaries, if you will, in terms of manufacturing, 5G, Catapult, and so we should get a lot of coverage in terms of things that's going on in the manufacturing sector. So just very brief introductions. We've got Katherine Bennett, who's the CEO of the HMV Catapult. We've got Steve Ashton from nexGworx. We've got Sam Turner, who's the CTO of the no, actually, we don't have Sam today. We got caught up in a time zone mix-up with Sam. We got Marc Funnell, who's the Director of Digital Engineering at the National Composites Center. Steve Phipson, who's the Chief Executive of MakeUK, and Dani Anderson, who's the 5G engineer from Strathclyde University. So we should get some really interesting insights from this session. And I'll now hand over to the chair of the panel, Katherine Bennett. Katherine, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you for the invitation. And I hope the conference has been going well. I know there's been a lot of chatter about it, so look forward to hearing some feedback. Yes, I'm absolutely delighted to be chairing this. This is my 7th day in my new role as CEO of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. Enjoying it hugely so far. Interesting going into a new role where you're not such an expert, so it sort of awakens your brain. But talking about experts, we certainly have experts on the panel. Delighted to see you, Stephen. Stephen and I have worked together over many years, and obviously a huge supporter of MakeUK. And I'll go through the rest of the panel, but really I wanted to perhaps start with you, Stephen, from your perspective. We know you have regular dialogue with the government on all range of issues that pertains to manufacturing and engineering in this country. And I just wondered whether you'd like to give your few minutes worth of how you view the world of innovation and manufacturing, and particularly smarter innovation. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Katherine, and delighted to be here. Well, you're quite right. And what we are seeing, of course, the UK has always been a hotbed of innovation. That's been really the hallmark of manufacturing in our country. But we have been focused a lot over the last couple of years on digital engineering, digital manufacturing, how we move that agenda forward, how do we get I4 really embedded in the supply chains in this country. And one thing that's really pleasing to see, Katherine, is on our survey results, we're starting to see a much greater understanding by the manufacturing base in this country. We're now getting, really high results in terms of people's understanding of the opportunity for digitization and smart manufacturing. If we look at it now, as of the survey we did about a month ago, in terms of digital technologies making a difference to people's business thinking about that. 81% of companies now in this country believe that digital manufacturing, digital technologies are actually key to their future. More than 90% of them now have digital transformation in their top 3 priorities. And 91% of them really do think it can make a difference to them acquiring new customers and new markets as we go forwards. Contrast that to 18 months ago. They were 10, 15, 20%, those results. So the work we've been doing, the work with government, the work on initiatives such as Made Smarter in particular, have really raised the awareness around the sector, which is great to see. And of course, we've got so many opportunities. And I know we're going to talk about supply chain in detail today. We can see some fantastic innovation going on there at the moment. And then, of course, we can talk about, as we do with government almost every day, Katherine, as you know, about where the government's role is going to be in this, because there are some quite big areas, particularly around skills, particularly around the investment climate to help people get onto this journey properly, and particularly around issues such as infrastructure in the country, around broadband infrastructure, which is where the government's got a very key role to play as we go forwards quickly. But we're very pleased to see the raising of the awareness at the moment. And I think now's the time for many of these companies to put this into action. And I know the Catapult works very hard on this alongside many other of our great institutions in this country. But it's pleasing to see. But we're at that point now where it's all about adoption of the wider SME community in particular. And I think, well, hopefully in this panel discussion, we're going to bring out some of those key points.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to pass to the other Stephen on the panel, but and I know your company has been really involved in putting this conference together or helping it take place. Steve. So I wondered if you'd like to talk a bit about maybe picking up on some of Stephen's points, maybe, how can we, what's your perspective on innovation and particularly cluster, which I know is a big passion of yours?
Yeah, look, I think that the test beds, the innovation centres always kind of have a key role to play in allowing manufacturers to really get a taste of kind of the capability of some of the new connectivity technologies that are out there and the kind of associated suite of products and services around them, without that having to make that initial high capital outlay just to have a taste of it. And I think those kind of environments create that kind of melting pot where you get systems integrators, solutions providers and manufacturers combining to kind of address the issues and look for new opportunities. And I think through sharing those opportunities and the demonstrators that we heard about earlier can inspire, and I think innovation across the whole range of across all those technology readiness levels. But I think what's really important is it's great to be working on the early TRLs, but I think some of the smaller manufacturers will be looking to quicker routes to in-life production where you're looking at those later TRL levels and how you bring those to life quickly. So I think those demonstrators are really valuable, and people will say, we've seen this before. Well, you may have seen something similar before, but there's a slight tweak to this in this particular aspect. And it's not necessarily just about what you're seeing, it's about what the benefits that technology can now enable that previously it didn't. And look, I think cost could still be a barrier to adoption for some, but with networks in a box and shift towards Open RAN, virtualization of core functions, and some of the things that we were talking about earlier when Dani was talking about access to shared spectrum, all of those things are really making it far more affordable for businesses and enterprise to look at these solutions, whether as an individual or maybe even developing a place case across an industrial park which specializes in a particular area of expertise where they've got similar needs of use cases. And I guess for me, the other way we accelerate this innovation, it's a little bit like we looked at lean manufacturing principles, all those kind of Six Sigma principles that came through in the 80s and the 90s. And it's the change managers that see the capabilities and can look at the kind of upper and lower levels and say, look, this works for us. This is how we bring in improvements to this process. And again, I think there's going to be a role there for larger manufacturers to start to explore that. And then once they start to demand that across their supply chains, I think the smaller enterprises will start to follow, and it will be led. And you'll hear tomorrow from AE Aerospace talking a little bit about the glass factory concept, where the customers can see it, and you're looking at that as a supply chain view. So for me, I think that's where we really start to bring the kind of innovation to life through UK manufacturing. And government's got a place to play. Stephen's right in terms of the digital infrastructure that's there that underpins some of this. We still need that fibre infrastructure to support 5G solutions, private models, and other types of technology that we look to.
And Steve, how do you see that? I know obviously you're very involved in Worcestershire. How do you see that working out as part of the levelling up agenda? I mean, this clustering is, I think, the way the government is going.
Yeah, look, I guess we hear quite a bit from levelling up and that traditional sort of M4 corridor that's housed all the telecoms experts over the last few years, and whether that starts to become more of a triangle. And I'd want to see it more of a triangle being pulled up towards the sort of Midlands area as well in region, but across the UK, I think it's required. And look, I think that area of speciality, what we've had in Worcestershire as an example, we've always tried to specialise in kind of low impact industries. It's a nice place to live. It's a nice space, but it's not necessarily the most industrial. We have some big HQs here. We're on the edge of what is the Midlands and a big conurbation. And I think where we sort of specialise in areas such as cybersecurity and agri-tech, and there's a big cluster of those around the Cheltenham and GCHQ and Herefordshire and Worcestershire. And I think that they're the kind of spaces that we see ourselves in, and pulling more of that telco up into those sectors and crossing the verticals is what it's about to me.
Thank you. I mean, I was listening to a speech earlier by Warren East from Rolls-Royce, and he talked about global levelling up, obviously from the perspective of a huge company like his. If I could just go back to you, Stephen Phipson, on this, I wonder what your take is on how the innovation patch can really shout louder or develop more in light of the levelling up policy?
Well, what's really become very important, and you've noticed this Catherine, over the last year, through the difficulties we've had with the pandemic, that place is becoming much more important. In all the discussions now with government, it's not so, I mean, levelling up is a kind of broad concept, but place now, making sure that these initiatives can be done locally, delivered locally, managed locally, encouraged locally in clusters, and taking not just the clusters we've got now, but broadening that out across the country is the way forwards. And every time we talk to our members across the whole of the UK, it's all about what can I do locally? What can I do with innovation locally? What support do I get? How's the LEPs working? And we know there's differences in approaches between different sort of local authorities in their support mechanisms, and indeed different universities. And there's a very interesting map we've got about where university clusters work very well on innovation as well across the country. And it's going to be about developing that place theme. I think that's going to be so important. We're going to see that become much, much more important over the next couple of years. And it has the key role to play because as we know, Catherine, one of the big challenges with nearly 300,000 companies involved in the manufacturing sector in this country is really getting that technology adoption going locally with SMEs. And that can only be done locally. It can only be done as part of place. So I think we're going to see a shift from these big national programs to really the focus to how we encourage that on a local basis. And I think that's absolutely where we are at the moment.
Thank you. Now introduced a couple of the other panellists. Marc, you're Director of Digital Engineering at the National Composites Centre, a centre I know well, and lovely to be part of the network with you now. Also, I just wondered about your view. I mean, we talked a bit about clustering, but more specifically, you know, how your area of expertise can basically accelerate this innovation.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Hi, it's great to have you on board at the HVM, by the way. So the NCC, I've been at the NCC now for a year and a half, starting to accelerate our digital engineering aspirations. And for us, engineering is broader than just the manufacturing. It's how we incorporate the intelligence from digital manufacturing, innovation, Industry 4, into our design facets. The better we design our products, the better we incorporate the capability of manufacturing into our products, the more likely we are to actually reduce, improve quality, reduce waste. So there's digitalization of manufacturing per se, and then there's also ensuring we accelerate how we define our products with our manufacturing knowledge. So there's a quite close link there. We're also really targeting adoption, transformation of our SME communities because we see that as absolutely key. And I totally reflect, Stephen, your points around keeping it local, keeping it in the cluster, keeping it in the place. The Southwest is known for its product innovation, product development in the aerospace, especially. We come from a large legacy in that area, and we also have a massive digital technology cluster in the area where we can look at 5G connectivity, telecommunications, all the technology there. We have the semiconductor Catapult sort of just over the water with us. So within our place, let's say, we have a fair whack of digital technology companies. We have a lot of product innovation, product development capabilities, and we have obviously the National Composites Centre as the gateway into our broader HVMC capacity. I do believe in the construct of the innovation hubs that you've heard, Made Smarter campaign, which really talks about the innovation hub as a national entity, but it really focuses on local test beds. And those local test beds, do offer demonstrators, but they're more than just demonstrators. They actually offer the playground to invite SMEs to come and look at how to implement technologies in a risk-free environment, which I don't think they've really had in the past. So going out to SMEs is absolutely key, but also offering them a platform where they can come and explore locally. What does it take to take those first steps on the journey? We talk about two things that we try and unlock in digital transformation, digital adoption. It's around the failure to launch concept. SMEs just have no clue where to start. So us as innovation centers, us with the test beds and innovation hub, we should offer them that door where they can come in and learn what not to do as much as what to do. We should offer them that fail fast kind of aspect because it's de-risking their first step on the journey and helping them understand what that first step would be in that return on investment. But we also talk about that failure to land concept, which says, well, that's great. You've got a demonstrator, you've got a proof of concept, but how do I get that incentive? How do I get that capital investment? How do I actually get my CEOs to actually adopt my MDs and starting them and helping them out, scale up, partner up, make buy analysis, all those kind of things really is what the test beds through the innovation center should help. And it should be happening very locally within those cluster regions within those regions, and so we can support the SME markets, but also under the umbrella of sharing the wealth of knowledge across how we're adopting, how we're using technologies, north to south, east to west, and really therefore giving the benefit to the SME communities. So that's the way I like to see a national program, which is all about knowledge sharing and your best practices and enabling capabilities, but local adoption, local demonstrators, local test beds, which are expanding and supporting the local communities. And I think that model works well. And I think that's the model that we're looking to put forward in the Innovation Hub programs.
Thank you, Marc. I mean, I'm very impressed by what I hear about the work that the Catapults do with the SMEs. And absolutely, this is partly government money. We absolutely understand the importance of SMEs. Do you have a couple of specific examples of successful work with SMEs that you could share?
Well, in a digital space, we've done a small testbed pilot, which I can talk about. So it's up and running at the NCC. It's part of the Innovation Hub pilot program. We actually have 2 or 3 digital technology providers come to the table launching their IoT platforms. So what we did was we built an architecture, and when I mean an IT architecture that allowed open access to the facility. And I think that's one key thing, is how do we start to create a place where people can access without having a lot of the IP, commercial, financial rigor and terms and conditions that you need to access. So companies such as Smartier, who's a small startup in the UK, IoT Horizon, who's another IoT sort of provider who's looking at sensorization of assets. They came in and they wanted to just essentially, use our test bed essentially to test and to take the journey on TRL level. So I think Steve talked about, it's not about the low TRL, this is about applied research. And what they did, IoT Horizon actually posted a sensor to us. They said, can you incorporate our sensor? We would like to see it actually streaming data off your machine. We did that for them. It took a couple of days, job done. Smartier actually asked us to install an entire industrialization OT system, which will ingest data off the machines, acquire it, and push it up into their cloud where they can perform some analytics and really get the know-how on how to actually make a change to the manufacturing process. So those are 2 small technology sprint projects, and they only take 2 or 3 weeks each. And that's what we've unlocked through the test beds, the ability to come in to do something really quick, to test out and to scale up their particular solutions, to build on their minimal viable product, and so offer some, more rigor so as industrial partners can see it operating in a real working industrial facility, which then helps them on their adoption journey. And that's more the technology journey and the technology provider's journey. But that's the sort of examples we'd be looking to do and do more of through our innovation test beds. Yeah?
Thank you. I mean, these stories we need to get out there more. It sort of really helps the narrative, doesn't it? Dani, I do apologise you're last, but I'm really grateful that you're here. So I think you agreed to join the panel at quite short notice. So we're delighted to have you with us. It sounds like you've already been involved in maybe other parts of the conference. And I know you're from the University of Strathclyde, so another perspective as well. I wondered if you'd like to share your thoughts on innovation and clustering in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much for having me as part of this quite illustrious panel. I think just to pick up on some of the things that have been said before, I think adoption of kind of SMEs is incredibly valuable for these kind of projects and for these kind of networks and these kind of deployments. Speaking from my own experience, a lot of our projects focusing on rural testbed development has a lot of integration with SMEs. I'm looking at our kind of 5G Rural First, 5G New Thinking, and 5G Rail Next had as much as these projects were led by Cisco, who are about as far away from an SME as I think you can be. They had a lot of significant drive from SMEs and communities. And I think it was Stephen mentioned again the role that SMEs will play in developing these test beds. A lot of the SDR type solutions and shared spectrum private network infrastructure that I spoke about earlier this morning, a lot of that came from what we would probably call tier 2 vendors and tier 2 solutions providers. And a lot of that was kind of demonstrating some of the later TLR technologies that Steve mentioned. And by targeting these kind of tier 2 vendors, you do get to reduce that kind of barrier of costs that was mentioned in combination with things like shared spectrum. I think as we're talking about kind of local hubs and local access. I'm not sure if I qualify as the north of the north at this point, being out of Glasgow, but I think I would be remiss not to mention something like the Glasgow City Innovation District, which has got a number of clusters kind of working within that. And the sort of two to highlight here would probably be the 5G and advanced communications cluster and the industrial informatics cluster. Among others that I'm not as involved in. So, I definitely think that the development of these kind of test beds are going to be really valuable for the industry. We've seen similar things through our kind of Wave 1 rural test bed development. So, SMEs have a critically important role to play in those.
Thank you. So now perhaps we touched a little bit on government policy and what more can the government do. Some of you may be aware that we're waiting for the FRAeS innovation strategy, which is due out. We understand it's slipped a bit maybe towards the middle of July, but I'm just kind of keen to discuss with you. We've touched a little on the localism debate, but maybe what more we would like to see the government to do. What should we advise when Stephen goes in to see the Secretary of State every week? What can we help Stephen with key information about? Perhaps if I come to you, Stephen, first of all, with your immediate thoughts on the government's view on innovation and are they in the right place?
I think the answer is that we're getting there, Catherine. I think there is the innovation strategy, as you say, hotly anticipated. I think the point that we try to reinforce at the moment with most of the cabinet ministers is about joining up across government, because there are lots of other factors around the pure innovation piece, the academic innovation piece, which actually goes to the success of the sector and success of businesses to adopt these things. And there's four sort of key areas that come out and are themes where we are constantly looking at ways that government can join these things up. The first one's around scaling up. So one of the big issues in the country has been about scaling up those great innovative little companies, where very often we don't create a unicorn in this country very often. It's extremely rare that we do this, whereas other countries are very good at doing that. And there's something around the scale-up environment, and government has a role there, particularly on patient capital, which is missing largely from the investment scene in this country, to help these smaller companies get to that larger scale very often. And we see it all the time. These great companies, we've helped them, the Catapult's been involved in them, MakeUK has been involved with them, and then the Americans come and buy them. And this is a great shame for UK PLC. So there is something about joining up around scaling up. There is definitely, we've mentioned it already, an infrastructure point here, because to be the right place for both inward investment and innovation in this country, we must have the right broadband infrastructure. 5G infrastructure across the country is still very much centred on the cities, and we have a big job to do that. And government needs to get on with it. We need to get that infrastructure developed and deployed really, really quickly. The fourth one is something that really does grind on all SMEs. It's around the investment environment we've got in this country as well. It cannot be right that if you're to buy a new digital CNC machine in your factory, that your rates are going to go up and you get taxed more for it. I mean, this can't be the way to manage innovation in a country that's set on innovation as a future in global Britain. And lastly, and the most important point in many respects from my point of view, is skills. And this comes back to place again as well. We've got a lot of national skills programs. It's now become very complex environments. We also have quite a lot at the local level as well. If you're an SME in the UK at the moment looking to upskill your workforce, enhance digital skills, particularly around data analytics, you largely have to find your own way, and hopefully and luckily your local university has got some interest in the area and is doing something with you. It's not really joined up enough at the moment, and we are working very hard with DFE to try to bring some sense to that. But the government's got a very big role to play in skills, and in many cases one of the big barriers to adoption has been skills. If we look at many companies, it's about traditional manufacturers saying, I need data analytics. I need to do something with robotics. And I find it really difficult to get those skilled people. So skills, again, another area of great deal of work required and a very important role for government to play there.
So Dani, say the Prime Minister decides to go north of the border, which he jolly well ought to, and comes to see you at Strathclyde. What would you say to him in terms of what more could the government do? And obviously I do appreciate as well there's the Scottish Government too, so it'd be useful to hear from you on their perspective.
I think the Prime Minister in particular does have a history of promoting rural connectivity and the requirements for rural connectivity, and I think Stephen's very correct to bring that up. And I obviously I have my own biases towards the role of rural connectivity, so I would be very keen to see as much support given to that as possible. That's something that we within the Strath SDR team have been working with for the last kind of 10 years. On maybe a wider range, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I do think that access to spectrum is one of the sort of key enablers for a lot of different technologies, and I know that that's a regulator aspect, but yeah, the wider form of governance. So.
And the Scottish Government's approach to innovation?
I think the Scottish Government's support of through the 5G Centre for the Wave 1 rural testbed in particular, I think that's going to be really valuable and has already been very valuable in building up these kind of clusters focusing on rural connectivity. The work that we are doing at Ross Priory at Loch Lomond and what Glasgow University are doing on their urban connected testbed and what the Scottish Futures Trust are doing to enable connectivity. Yeah, I think that will help. And the SME engagement with each of those projects and work streams is really good as well. So.
Thank you. So Steve, say that Boris Johnson decides to come to Malvern Valley Park. What would you like to say to him?
Look, I think the previous two guys have seen my bulleted list here that I was noting down as I went along, because look, I think getting government departments always to work together has been a challenge. But I do think with 5G, it crosses so many verticals and departments and pieces that there's an opportunity there. And again, coming out of the last 18 months that we've been looking at, again, I think the look to digital, the realization of that means this 5G is potentially the one of the good vehicles to use to get people to work together around that space, whether it be true 5G or not, let's say. And I'll have to give UK government credit here as well. I think, lessons learned from previous investments around 4G and being a bit slow to start around that. I think there've been some great investments. I think BDUK have done a good job in setting gigabit targets. And, it's a challenging space, right? And we're not there yet. But the commitment to that digital infrastructure, I think, is clear. I think that the investment in the 5G and the use cases and supporting those use cases and exploration and further development of the use cases becoming business cases, more of the same there is kind of what I'd say. Potentially, how do we get more SMEs engaged and not losing that? The challenge we've had with coming out of the funding from a testbed is keeping it alive. So you're not just paid for a testbed and then let it wither on the vine. Let's invest in that and build on that and support more use cases for people to come and trial and test. I think that the key point that was kind of made there around the tax, there's been tax breaks offered to full fibre installations, is the space to look at that from a factory, investing in private network solutions as well. And the panel that was mentioned yesterday, the panel mentioned that skills gap. And yesterday they were talking about the longer term view from primary and secondary schools, which I think is great. And you've got to have that transition because it's been that's nothing. We're not learning anything new there than we've been told before. But I think it's also some of those short-term pieces, what can be done around people looking to change careers, particularly at the current time, digital skills, improving those digital skills, and even things just, I think that this is less of skills, but it might just be more a case of around awareness. So looking at professions such as you're looking to deploy networks, are architects of business parks thinking about digital when they're designing the building? Are the systems architects that are looking at it thinking about the latest wireless technologies, whatever they may look like when they're thinking about, I'm not just going to put some duct trays in. You need to put duct trays in, right? But think about how you're designing your building and your facility to do that around those operations. Are change managers thinking about it? So I do think there's a broader awareness of digital technologies in different industries. And we've done in Worcestershire, just thinking about, we've had it in industry with Industry 4.0. We've had the same conversations with our health and social care partners when we're looking at a rural health project in Worcestershire. And I'm starting to have the same conversations when I'm talking to agri-tech people and the others. It's not unique to any particular sector. These are things that I think as a broader brush need to get resolved.
Thank you. Just as I asked Marc about examples of working with SMEs, sort of case studies, do you have any more you could share on work your organisation have done with SMEs? Because I do think this really brings it to life when you're dealing with government.
We've got a good chunk of use cases on our website. Some of the things that we've done, we've got our old papers there. And I mean, the key one at the minute, well, not the key one, but one of the main ones we've been working with on the West Midlands 5G project has been AE Aerospace. And AE Aerospace are on the panel tomorrow afternoon talking about what they've done. So I don't want to tread on Ian Bouquet-Taylor's toes too much, but it's been really exciting working with Ian because, again, what you see there when you go into the SME and what we've found around digitisation and pieces, people can be on various stages of the journey, right? But when you go in and you look at one solution and one use case for them, all of a sudden there may be a skeptic and they actually know this works, and then I can apply it to this and I can apply it to the other piece. And that's what we saw in AE Aerospace. We just saw a growing kind of piece of realization that once you've got that capability and you understand what the technology can do, you start to realize multiple applications for it. And that's where the current higher bandwidth technologies, lower latency technologies are really supporting those use cases to be built. So yeah, for me, that in AE Aerospace we've learned quite a bit, and then also the SMEs that have come to work with us as well, and that can be anybody looking at testing an application on a device and just saying, look, does this work over 5G, right? And you talked about a unicorn, a software version. If it's software based, you can come and do that. Or is it a case of putting the equipment into a CNC machine that we did with Mazak, and they supply the SMEs and support that chain that way? So in danger of rambling on a little bit there, I think there's quite a few use cases. And again, these cross sectors, and you see the same things appearing over and over again. It's because people can see the value in them and they can see the benefits and they can apply those quite sensibly to their business or to their business sector.
Thank you, Steve. So Marc, in terms of what more do you feel we need from the government? Obviously, I work closely with the NCC with another hat I wear, which is chair of the Western Gateway, which is the newest economic powerhouse. I know, Steve, you work with the Midlands Engine in Worcestershire, but the Western Gateway is a similar thing across South Wales and west of England. And there's a big project, isn't there, Marc, called the Digital Accelerator.
Correct.
But, would you like to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the Western Gateway is essentially looking to launch off the strengths of the region, which is essentially the west of England in its entity, but also moving across into the Welsh area, South Wales at least. And it's going to capitalize on the technology capabilities that we have in terms of connectivity, compound semiconductors, cybersecurity, and combine those in our creative industries, where we have a very strong creative industries with the BBC, Netflix, and all those kind of companies are housed in the region, alongside some big industrial engineering companies in the advanced engineering space. So we have a number of what we call vertical sectors, which are looking to exploit the technologies and scale up ultimately, and start to explore how we would introduce these technologies into those vertical sectors, and a lot of capability across that Western Gateway, which look to plug in things like the skills agenda. How do we get skills into all those vertical sectors? How do we use connectivity? How do we get cybersecurity? How do we get data science? So we talk about enabling capabilities, which is the backbone for digital, and how those get exploited into those 4 vertical sectors. And I'm very excited about the Western Gateway construct. We have the DETI, which is our Digital Engineering Technology Innovation Program, which is a fast start funded by WECA, which is our local sort of combined authority, looking to take the universities of Bristol, universities of Bath, universities west of England, that entire research community, and all the extensive capability they have in digital skills with their centers for doctoral training and their skills and workforce development programs, and combining those with 3 RTOs, the NCC, the Centre for Modelling and Simulation, and most recently, we have a partnership that the DigiCat is establishing with the University of Bristol. So you're starting to see the digital catapult moving its positioning and moving its, decentralizing itself into the Western Gateway perspective. And I was most recently of a call with NPL, where they're also considering how they would move and decentralize some of their work. So you're starting to see some momentum gathering around this concept, where we have a number of colliding and cross-sectoral capabilities in that Western Gateway area, which together I think are going to make quite a unique proposition and place for where national government can come and invest for innovation. If I can just harbour a little bit on the skills thing, it is an absolutely valid point. I think Steve made a valid statement. Is a lot of discussion, and skills. When I look at it, it's very diverse and it's a very complex landscape. You've got a load of academics, HE communities, and we have the Gatsby proposal. We have HVMC taking a really active lead in some of the skills agenda and frameworks. We look at it within our DETI construct around 3 facets around, inspiring the next generation. That's more of your STEM activities. That's great. That's an ongoing activity. Transforming how the FE and HE colleges think about digital engineering. Now, we don't talk of it as a standalone kind of curriculum. It's embedded in the current curriculums of engineering, and how do we bring the engineers of the future up with digital skills? But most importantly, I think this comes from maybe my industrial background, is the workforce we have today. We can take a lot of them, and there's a number of really strong characters in our workforce, which just with the right kind of tweaking and tailoring of the work that they're doing, we can turn them into what our class as digital engineers. Our manufacturing engineers today, with a little bit of skill sets in integration, systems integration and analytics, they can become those digital transformation engineers. We can take some of our IT colleagues of today who are very much focused in the operations business as usual facet and teach them a little bit more about research, thinking about future networking, thinking about infrastructure, the IT side, and then colliding the IT and the OT world together, because that's the sweet spot for digital engineering, for digital. Essentially, is getting those two teams to work together more effectively. Now, I've been in organizations where that's very difficult. And that whole change in philosophy of how we should evolve our workforce is what we're really focusing a lot of our attention on in terms of the transformation we're doing to ourselves at the NCC. And so we're looking to see how we would do that. And, do we get externals to come in? And we talked to Steve earlier on this panel, we have our 5G program. Should we actually go and get a third party to provide the services? Or could we actually take our engineering service help desk today and train them on how to develop into a space where they can support 5G networks? And so that's the transformation we're going through. So, we very much are more about the grassroots. How do we take our workforce and how do we also start to change those? And I don't think we should underestimate that. A lot of what I see from the skills and focus of the workforce development is really future skills, people coming into the market. And that's fantastic. We also talk about diversity. How do you bring people from different ethnic and, other backgrounds, who may be, let's say, slightly autistic, they might be fantastic in the data analytics space, starting to unlock a lot of that potential. And how do we bring that into the engineering capacities? And it's an area of passion, you can tell, about how do we start to explore our workforce of today and the people who are there and mature enough to be able to just change slightly what they're thinking, what they're doing, to turn them into those digital engineers. This is not a fundamental shift in some of our mindsets. It's only a small tweak to some people's mindsets. And I think that's where we really need to start focusing attention, putting some effort myself, rather than necessarily looking only at STEM and only at the FE and HE colleges perspective.
Thanks, Marc. You actually stole my thunder because I was
good.
I remember reading, I think it was in the news this week, wasn't it, that more and more women are now going into AI studies as well. And I agree with you, trained from within as well. When
absolutely.
I was at Airbus, that was a big thing, retraining people and also attracting sort of more diverse people who've come from a completely different mindset. One other thing, maybe touching on what more can the government do, and I'm going to pick on you, Stephen, because of your background within government, in terms of how can we promote what the UK is good at in this patch more externally to the outside world. I mean, the Ventilator Challenge project, which High Value Manufacturing Catapult helped lead, I was just talking about it earlier on a panel session with some parliamentarians, and this amazing story about how we managed to build ventilators within 12 weeks from a standing start. And that really did put us on the map internationally. I just wondered if there's any thoughts any of you on the panel might have on sort of the UK status in the world on this topic. Maybe start with you, Stephen, as I know you're pretty specialist on this topic.
No, absolutely, yes, from my time in DIT in particular. But absolutely, it's all about demonstrating use cases and case study examples. And actually, we're starting from a very good place, Catherine. We all know when you go out, I mean, I've spent my whole career exporting all around the world, all different things, both in government and in the industrial sector. And the UK is definitely seen as high innovation, very clever at coming up with clever solutions, clever ways of doing things. And it's always been about, and again, going back to government, what role can they play? The refresh of the export strategy. I'd like to see much more use cases in there about demonstrating the innovation in the country and where it's at. In the current trade deal negotiations, I've been involved in that with DIT as sitting on the advisory groups and talking to for example, the Australian and the New Zealand High Commissioners recently about those trade deals. And I've focused on innovation. I mean, it's been about how can the UK manufacturing base help them with their national ambitions on innovation, particularly around net zero and around sustainability, and how can we write a different sort of trade deal to showcase it. So I think that kind of thinking is where we're going for the future, rather than looking at it in a very traditional sense. But we have a good place to start because everyone knows that we're good at innovation. I think a lot more of those case studies, and actually, as we're finding at MakeUK now, Catherine, a lot more kind of video clips about how we're doing this stuff goes down much better than 5 pages of script now. So people like to see that, particularly in overseas government departments. So more of that, I think, Catherine.
So use digital means to get over our digital capabilities. Any other panelists like to comment on sort of our place in the world? Marc?
Yeah, and maybe I'll go off on a little bit of a tangent just as you rein me in Catherine. I'm South African by birth, and one of the reasons why I was excited to come to the UK was its history of design, its history of really introducing innovative products, and I guess I would like to see that really being recognised as a very strong innovative position. So a lot of focus, rightly so, in the Made Smarter campaign has been on how we transform our manufacturing landscape. I think now is the time for us to look at, well, how do we take all the knowledge and intelligence that entire campaign has created, that intelligence and data that we're getting from our manufacturing systems, start to embed that into how do we design and accelerate the product definitions and the new products for sustainability, new products for net zero. And if we can be at the forefront of all of that, then we own the industrialization messaging. The design is the place that you actually embed how manufacturing definitions are going to be incorporated, what manufacturing techniques, what materials you want to use, why, because of this performance, these characteristics. And if we're not owning necessarily that definition and that statement within a global landscape, bear in mind Rolls-Royce, Airbus, they're global companies, GCAN, we need to be at the forefront of innovating how we accelerate that product definition phase so we can secure the future of UK manufacturing. Because otherwise it becomes a bit of a commodity item. Where can we get it done cheaply? Not necessarily where can we get it done at the best, basically. And if we're designing and taking our manufacturing intelligence and embedding it into our product cycles and our definition cycles, I think we can secure way more onshoring, as well as people from outside will come and recognize the UK as the place where design can really be done and innovation on these new sustainable products of the future that we need can actually be done in a way more accelerated fashion, getting them time to market in half the time, in the third of the time. Big wind turbines, fusion reactors, the new future of aircraft. That's what we're really excited about, is how do we take those next steps on that journey, and how do we start to build on the manufacturing intelligence that we have and incorporating that into our design for the future, essentially, especially with sustainable materials. And being at the forefront of sustainable materials is all part of it, yeah? I'll get off my soapbox now, but I think we need to get into that space more. And that's where I'd be looking for government to really put their hands up and say, come and help us invest, because the UK needs to be recognised back in that space. That's where we were, and we're slowly losing that. So let's get that back, kind of thing.
So going back to I've cantered around a few topics, haven't I? But I mean, I think the title of this panel was focusing on 4.0. And I think Stephen mentioned it right at the start, looking at the supply chain now. I'd just be really interested to hear, when you're out and about doing your roles, talking to stakeholders, etc., and of course businesses. I wonder, is there a bit of fear about Industry 4.0? What does it mean? We've touched on SMEs, but I just wondered if we could unpack that a bit more about what the supply chain, what we think the supply chain should be focused on. Shall I kick off with you, Stephen?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what's very interesting, Catherine, I think from my perspective, the last few months in particular, with some of the large companies, really with large supply chains in the country, we're starting to see the language has changed now. I think as a result of the pandemic, one of the things that is actually done is to accelerate a lot of thinking around supply chain resilience. And so the language of supply chain resilience is coming through. Transparency in their supply chains is coming through. Accelerating the use of AI and digital technologies. We've got some really, really interesting examples now where some of our larger companies with thousands of suppliers in their supply chain are very effectively deploying AI in their supply chains and then bringing their suppliers with them along that journey, which is very interesting. And a lot of discussion around sustainability and circular supply chains, which is something we never saw a year ago. Some of the larger companies now really thinking about strategies for circular supply chains. That means supply into manufacturing and then use the product and then recycling it back into production again. The whole cycle of a circular supply chain. Very interesting, because with the use of data analytics now, they're able to actually monitor this kind of data level, which they weren't able to do before, and actually plot a complete strategy around it. So I think the pandemic is accelerating these trends, particularly as companies think about resilience and risk. And I can't tell you how many large, very well-known names have shut down production lines because of one component that came from China they couldn't get hold of for 6 months. And so that's created a whole look at this idea of resilience, which will actually, I think, fuel the digital transformation for many of their suppliers. And I think I'm quite excited about that. And I'm great. It's great to be involved in many of those discussions in boardrooms at the moment about that kind of thinking. And I think that's something that's really quite a new trend. It's really accelerated that change, I think.
I still keep hearing stories about things that were stuck in the Suez Canal. Do you remember that? That ship? Dani, any views from you on the supply chain, what manufacturing supply chain partners need to be thinking about?
I think it's probably not an area that I've got, definitely not as much expertise as some of the other people on this panel, but I would probably highlight that kind of supply chain management is going to require almost ubiquitous connectivity and, more importantly, perhaps interoperability between different kinds and different styles of networks, between private networks, public networks, between different technologies within those networks. And I think one of the key issues that we can never really lose sight of is the idea of maintaining security across all of these different things, because that's going to be a significant kind of technical challenge. So, yeah, I don't know whether that is an area that manufacturers and the manufacturing industry in particular need to be focused on, or whether that's a sort of wider technology challenge. But that's always at the forefront of my mind when I think about that.
Thank you. Steve, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I'll just picking up on Dani's point really there around those kind of networks and systems integrators and public to private, private to public, and all those kind of handover points. I think it is important that businesses think about that, because there's an element of trust there between the business, the manufacturer, or whoever they may be, and then the systems integrator or the network operator. And they may enter into a longer term arrangement which may block some of these things. So that local intelligence within the company is important, and you need to understand, how you might want your network to work and play. And I think that the other one, as Stephen mentioned there, that the importance of transparency within the supply chain, upstream and downstream, or further and backwards inside the circle, if that's the way it's moving. But again, that's primarily what we've been looking at aerospace with the glass factory concept. And the point came in again about quality control. And we've done some AI work with company Vision Intelligence, have been a part of the West Midlands 5G, Worcestershire, with nexGworx test bed alongside BT as well, that we've been working on. And they're looking at quality control of items. And again, that can really save time within a supply chain to stop a whole shipment being stopped or enabling it to move forward at the right sort of time without having to have someone else externally come out and check that. I think there's... And it speeds the pace up of that quality control checking, well, allowing you to go through more components. So for me, I think quality control, and also with thinking about the new technologies and things like the just in time. I think the principle of just in time with the capabilities of increased amount of data, live data, supporting that. I think the logistics play is a really strong one around modern networks, let's say.
Thank you. Marc, you've touched a bit on the work with the SMEs, but any other thoughts and observations on...
Many, Catherine. But I think one of the areas, and it touches across areas, it's the infrastructure piece. If I looked across at what other governments are doing, in the US, there's an entire government network which people can use, which is set up for supply chain engagement. It's quite cyber secure and everything. Is that something that the national government should be considering as part of its infrastructure messaging? Coming back to what should we be asking for government? The whole backbone of how you communicate and trust, that Steve indicated, is absolutely fundamental. If I share my data, this is where we come from the digital supply chain. If we're sharing our data, or if I'm sharing my data, what does it mean with respect to my terms and conditions with my customer? What does it mean with my contract obligations, my commercial frameworks? All those things need to be investigated as part of that digital supply chain. And then very simply around resilience is understanding, because Stephen hit it, it's people would like to work with suppliers who are more conscious of the environment. And therefore a supply chain database which promotes which suppliers, what level, and what are they doing, what are they up to, but also their carbon footprint necessarily. How do we start to get to a point where, let's say we have a net zero UK national database of suppliers who therefore, which is available to us, that can, not to industry, for them to actually build their own supply chains, new supply chains, more resilient supply chains, understanding where their market's coming from. And that whole network of which supplier is getting information from which one. That visibility, I think, is absolutely key. In the Innovation Hub program, it has two parts to it. It has a smart factory part to it from the Made Smarter campaign, as well as a digital supply chain part to it. And a lot of these activities are looking to be dealt with inside that Innovation Hub is the hope. So I think we have a vehicle to do it. But for me, ultimately, it's the infrastructure and the absolute trust of putting information into that. Does it actually detrimentally affect my business? And what are the benefits I'm going to get back for being a part of the supply chain integrated kind of community is something we need to overcome with the SME engagement in that process.
Thank you. One of the things that questions about collaborations with universities, and we've touched on this a little. Stephen talked about it in terms of wider collaboration and the levelling up, and I know some of you, obviously Dani, you are part of a university, but I'd just be interested to maybe unpick that a little bit more, because that's a key part of the infrastructure as well, and we've got some great university strengths. I don't know whether Steve, with the work you've done in Worcestershire, you give some more examples about university collaborations. Again, this is a good case study.
Yeah, and we started our journey. I think when we were talking about 5G in 2016, the first people we went to speak to were the University of Surrey. The 5G Innovation Centre there, and they're already now looking at 6G Innovation Centre, and that's where they've gone. And we learned a lot from that, especially, as I say, around those academic pieces, those other bits of learning. And we wanted to move on, I think, and move things a little bit closer to the practical and the higher, as I said earlier, the higher TRLs effectively. But we did some good work in both HE and FE, and those partners, what they're interested in. And I think the academics that you see in placements within some of the businesses and within some of the DCMS projects as well, offer a different way of thinking and crystallize in some cases, the detail there. So. Yeah, walked out on that one.
Thank you. Dani, you are part of a university. Do you think there's more that business needs to be doing?
It's very difficult, I guess, for me to say from this side of the aisle. I will just say that, in my kind of current position, projects, we've worked with quite a diverse range of tier 1 and SME partners, and it's always a very educational experience. Hopefully that goes both ways, but we always learn a little bit more about whether that's in a rural environment, in a manufacturing environment. So I would want to really just emphasize that kind of collaboration, I think, is valuable, and like I said, hopefully in both directions. So.
Thank you, Dani. Stephen?
I think, I've seen some wonderful collaborations on not just on purely academic basis, Catherine, but on really practical help for businesses. I mean, University in Peterborough, for example, comes to mind in helping a rather large company in a complete digital transformation of their engineering section, including writing job descriptions and designing training courses for upskilling staff and everything else. And that very close collaboration is so valuable. And I'd like to see much more of that kind of activity across the piece. And we do have some brilliantly good examples. I often say to senior leadership in universities about sharing that experience across the network, because it's companies see that as so valuable, and they could do more of that. But we have some brilliant examples of that working across the country. But again, people have, I suppose the comment I get from some companies, it's a postcode lottery as to where you. Trying to really socialise that sort of activity, getting many more universities involved in those local initiatives, which makes such a big difference to those companies, is a great thing to do. And I think we should be doing more of it.
Thank you. Maybe the final word from Marc, as you're part of the Catapult that I work for now, and then we'll hand over to Mike in the studio. Marc, any comments on university collaborations?
No, I mean, University, I mean, obviously we're very closely affiliated as the NCC with the University of Bristol. So we have the luxury, and with our DETI program with the Universities of Bath and University of West of England, and we have the, great for us, they're very strong in their digital sector. So, collaboration is absolutely key. We don't believe in developing things which are not our strength areas. We prefer to partner up, and I think that's the real key message here. With digital tools, collaboration outside of just your local universities is absolutely an opportunity for you to grasp. So we're all for it. We'd like to extend through our network of HVMCs. We do collaboration, and with our wider sort of network of universities, wherever their strength is and wherever we can get learning, let's capitalize on it rather than duplicating it is really my message in that space.
Okay, well, thank you to all four of you for joining the panel today and for fielding the questions so ably. I really look forward to the next Tommy Flowers event. I had a quick look at the website a few weeks ago and very interested to see all the activity that's going on. So I'll hand back to Mike in the studio.
Great, Catherine, thank you very much. I almost ran out of paper taking notes. Fascinating panel discussion. There was a number of takeaways for me around collaboration. Collaboration is going to obviously be a really big issue with this, whether it's the large internationals, the SMEs, academia, the clusters. There's got to be more of a holistic perspective on this. The value of the clusters themselves in terms of contributing to all of this stuff. I really like the point about the investment environment. We're talking about capital-intensive industries here, and if we don't get that investment environment just right, I can see UK PLC actually falling behind with some of the other countries from that perspective. The other two areas that are kind of connected and close to my heart, skills and culture. We can talk about digitalization, transformation until the cows come home, but until we get the skills right and we get the culture right in some of these companies. I'm doing some work with some large corporates, and we got the guys on the factory floors going, oh, no, we've been doing it this way for 20 years. We're going to keep doing it this way because it works. But that's just one of the things we have to overcome as going forward. The other big issue was about supply chain resilience. I think this did strike home with COVID striking in the way that it did. I remember back in the 80s, it was all about just in time. How do you minimize it? How do you just get the stuff there when you need it? And I think people are beginning to realize they got to be a bit more resilience than that. I've recently seen a couple of artificial intelligence tools that allows you to predict that based on world events, which is a really interesting piece of technology as well. And then, at the risk of forgetting about it, because it tends to be last on a lot of people's list, sustainability. As a species, we're doing a lot of harm to the environment. What other ways can we actually do to actually make our manufacturing a lot more sustainable? And I think, I believe it was, Stephen, you made a comment about it being almost circular. How do we get this kind of circular sustainability built into industry? So fascinating panel discussion. So I'd fully like to thank all of our panelists, Marc, Stephen, Dani, and Catherine. Thank you very much for chairing the sessions. It's not always an easy thing, but I think they all behave themselves.
They do.
Great. So thank you all very much.